Hi there. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Sharon Kallis, and I'm with Earth Hand Gleaners Society. We are an arts-based nonprofit in Vancouver, Canada, on the unceded traditional territories of the Wakelyns, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. One of our big questions that we ask as we move through the world as a community is, how do we be makers without first being consumers? And to that end, it gives us all kinds of opportunity to step into conversation and dialogue, learning about how we can be where we are in a good way, how we can build relationships with each other, with the land, with the people around us, with the plants around us, with the animals, and what are some of the historic traditions that we can look to that we can bring into the future we're moving into together. So this is the very first conversation of this series, to be continued. I am really excited to step back into conversation today with Claire O Sullivan, who is co-founder of the Contemporary Hempery at Wakelyns Farm in the UK. And I had the great pleasure of arriving at the Contemporary Hempery to help with the hemp harvest for the August 2024 hemp retreat. Fantastic weekend of camping and being fed really well, harvesting hemp even in the pouring rain. We had just a brilliant time, and there were so many amazing folks doing incredible work in textile revival in their communities that were there that weekend that I didn't think I'd have a chance to meet on this trip. So it was really exciting to have a chance to meet so many individuals doing this great work, and Claire holding it all down with grace and panache and style alongside Kitty. And Claire, in particular, our first night gave this incredible presentation on the history of hemp in this region, East Anglia. And I was really surprised to recognize suddenly that in my own work, I'm doing an ancestral cloth, trying to understand where my ancestors have come from, where they've arrived, and what are the textile and land stories that I can thread together or weave together there, to realize that I actually had three ancestors who departed from 40 to 50 kilometers around the Wakeland farm area. And that was just kind of like mind expanding for me. And I want to just thank you in advance, Claire, for everything you've been researching and learning and sharing, and for making that connection for me. And so to that end, I asked Claire if she would be so kind to share that presentation with us and then step into conversation with me around what's happening now at the Contemporary Hempery and all of the work. So that's enough from me for now. I am thrilled to turn it over to Claire to screen share. And anything you want to introduce yourself there before I turn my camera off and pinpoint you?
Well, I just want to thank you very much for inviting me to do this, and actually thank you so much for coming to the retreat. I mean, your presence was, you just brought so much different new energy to our meeting, and it was great. But it ended up like a symposium of fiber lovers, didn't it?
It
was a
really, it
special
did.
weekend.
And it, that kind of that FOMO, fear of missing out, because I'd be like invested in this really amazing conversation here and aware that there was like another fantastic conversation happening just, 8 feet away at the other table. But
I kept missing that because I was busy doing all the stuff. I kept thinking, oh, I couldn't join in with everybody. But it was a wonderful weekend. I was so happy you were there.
it was brilliant. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn myself off there. And wonderful. Thank you.
Let me see what I can do here. Okay, so this is a presentation that I make various places about the history of hemp. It's become an absolute obsession of mine, the history of hemp worldwide, but very specifically in the region that I now live in. I was born up here in East Anglia, but have lived away for the last 40 years, came back here, and there's something about the hemp. It's just, I've got to say, it's pretty much taken over. Let me see, how am I going to get this to go for the next? No. Oh, hold on 1 minute, people. Why am I not? I'm going to have to do that. Okay, so the first thing I say, and you may well know this, but I often do this talk to people who are not real fibre lovers, is that it's not marijuana, despite what you see on the screen there. The crop that we're growing, all the seeds that we're allowed to grow in the UK are ones that are approved by the EU, and they have 0.02% THC in them. So the tetrahydrocannabinols, which the psychoactive material that give you the high, are just not available in this plant. So, you know, I always say to local people, please don't come and try and scrump my fields, because there's nothing of any pleasure in it in that respect. So aside from East Anglia, I'm going to kind of rattle through this bit. Earliest known uses of hemp that we are aware of, the Chinese, very industrious people, of course, they been using it for textile and paper since at least 12,000 years ago. A Neolithic site in Yunnanshan, which is modern day Taiwan, marked, they've got pottery marked with hemp, and also tools for beating hemp in China. Cotton and flax were not really used until thousands of years later, as far as we know. Hemp was the original. The Egyptians used it for ropes, and the Greeks and the Romans also used it. They imported it from Gaul, the Romans that is, which is France. And of course, the French still make huge amounts of beautiful hemp fabric, which we would be involved if we hadn't Brexited. Unfortunately, we made a big error there. So this picture is of the mere in my local town. So a mere is just another word for a lake. And in this lake, a few years ago, they did core testing, you know, where they send down a big tube and bring out all the mud. And they found around 1,000, the year 1000, there was a massive spike in the amount of hemp pollen in the lake. So we know that they were using hemp for textile or something, using the fibre right 1,200, anyway, a long time ago. No one can quite say why there was this big spike in the use of hemp at that point, although it has been suggested to me that there was a big rise up in the monasteries at that time, and potentially they were using the hemp for their fabric. So yeah, hemp first really appeared in East Anglia, where I am. So we're on the eastern seaboard of the UK, in the bit that sticks out on the eastern side, where the Anglo-Saxon times, which is sort of accepted to have lasted about 600 years, between 450 and 1066, when the Normans came and took us over again, constantly being taken over. The Anglo-Saxons, we know full well they used it for their clothing. They called it hempen spun. And I would have to assume, although we haven't actually got a record of this, of course, they used it also for their sails. So in order to come here and get us in the first place, they sailed in under a hempen sail. So now I'm going back on to actually the processing of the hemp. The period that I'm talking about in East Anglia is really about 1550 to 1820. This is the sort of period where it was a huge boom town for the hemp production in this region. And they were making hemp cloth. I mean, when I talk about hemp, everyone says, oh, we're making sacks and rope. But it's like, no, in this region, hemp was being used for clothing and household linens. And it became a really, really big and important industry, which was supplying hemp cloth, not just in East Anglia, but right across the country. We've got records of cloth merchants coming from Manchester, which is a good few hundred miles away from here, up in the north, coming across with 2 horses down to the markets in Norwich and Diss in order to buy hemp cloth, take it back up there. And this was cloth for clothing. So it was a really important industry, thriving, and it was, because of the amount of processing that's involved, apart from the actual growing, you know, I know that you're all fibre people listen to this, so you understand about the amount of hand processing that's required to get the best fibre from the plant. Pretty much everybody, all rural workers in this area at some point during the year would have been involved in the hemp growing and processing trade. So it was really important economically for many, many families. So I'm going to move on here to the processing. Again, I may be speaking to the converted, you may know all this, but having grown your hemp, which of course is very, very easy to do, basically you plough the land, you put the seed in and up it comes. I mean, we've had 3 harvests now. The first one was quite miraculous. We put the seed in the ground and within 8-9 weeks, it was all 6 to 7 foot tall. This even, tall, green, beautiful hemp jungle you could walk through. It was all over your head. It was absolutely gorgeous. Second year, it didn't grow quite as well. We were in a very wooded area. And this year, I'll get onto that later, it really didn't grow very well at all. It was thin and weedy, and we were really worried about whether we were going to get any fibre from it. However, I'll go on to that bit later. But you can grow it pretty much anywhere. It doesn't destroy the soil, so you don't have to rotate it as you do most crops. There is a record of a field in Hoxton, which is a village not far from here. The village I live in, Fressingfield, Stradbroke and Hoxton made a triangle, which was actually the centre of the historic hemp industry. We're on a river valley called the Waveney Valley. And at one time, the Waveney Valley, which is a pretty small area, it turned out nearly 10% of the entire UK's hemp output. So it was, really important. It was grown in big fields and small fields, and cottagers grew it at home. It was really everywhere. So you put a seed in. This area was a woodland, it's called a woodland pastoral agricultural area. So we're talking about dairying and keeping pigs and a little bit of arable land, sort of mixed farming. And the hemp fits in really well with that, because the period where you've got the hemp in the ground, you don't have to do anything to it. That's the time of year when you're really, really busy. You're harvesting other crops. All the dairying and stuff is really at its height, where the hemp is just growing away. You don't have to weed it. That's the big thing. Most crops you've got to keep on top of the weeds, but because the hemp grows so fast and so strongly that it actually outcompetes all other weeds and leaves, you just don't have to do anything to it. So it fit in really well with that woodland pastoral agricultural system. So there you are, you've got your hemp in the ground. 6, 8, 9 weeks later, it's ready to pull. So there are 2 very distinct parts, plants, the male and the female. The male plant matures about a month before the female plant. It's called a fimble, and you can see really instantly, it's a different shape, it's a different colour, it yellows really quickly, and it makes beautiful fibre. So the fimble was always pulled, you start pulling it about a month before the female plants are ready. So it's not a crop that we made this mistake the first 2 years by just cutting it all at the same time. And for our purposes as getting the finest fibre, that was the wrong thing to do. We've learned that now. We've had to learn everything by doing it, because apart from these kind of pictures you can see on the screen and some very, very old books, there was no one for us to consult about how to make the finest fibre. There are people growing hemp in the UK for fibre, but it's almost exclusively for insulation and industrial purposes. So there we are. You've got your hemp, you've pulled it, you've got it all tied into baits, a bundle, they call them baits. And then the first process after that is retting. So the retting is just a slightly nicer word for rotting. And the hemp, you can see in this first big picture, they've got the bundles of hemp, the baits of hemp, and they're putting them into the water. And you leave it in there for about, depends. The younger hemp rets more quickly than the older hemp. So maybe 5, 6, 7 days, maybe up to 8 or 9 days for the oldest hemp. And then the bast fibres, which I probably all know, are on the outside of the plant, the outside of the stem. It just starts to rot, basically. The bacteria gets under that fibre and pushes it away from the stem. And you have to keep a close eye, because leave it too long and it rots and then the whole thing breaks. So that's the retting. Then you've got to dry it all again in the sun, make sure it's super dry. In the picture that says scutching, you can see at the very back, there's a lady sitting down by a fire. So if you haven't got your hemp dry enough, you can put it over a kiln in order to dry it out good and proper. However, of course, that is pretty dangerous, and there are lots of records of people just going on fire. So you want to watch that. So then we're going to break the hemp. We used pictures like this one and flax breakers, which are very similar, to see just how to make the tools. And actually Kitty's grandpa made one, some guy in the village made one for us. And yeah, it was really good fun actually to go around making these old tools just out of bits of upcycled wood and whatever we could find. So first is to break the hemp. You're pulling the straw through a big heavy armed basher really, and yeah, breaking the straw and then scutching it. In the picture you can see the guy with the hat next to the wall on the left hand side. He's got a big bunch of fibre in his hand there, and he's hitting it with a bat against a board. That takes off all the last little bits of the core, the inner core, the shibs. So there's the breaking and the scutching, and then the last picture is the heckling. You can see these guys here in some kind of barn. I think they're in France actually, but whatever. Pulling the fibres that they've got from the straw through the heckling combs, getting out all the knotty bits, all the short bits, so they just are left with the absolutely beautiful, fine, long fibres. We love heckling. It's our favourite part of the whole process. Going from a coarse comb to a medium comb to a really, really fine comb. The toe, the short bits that are left are called the toe. You may, again, you probably know this, which is not a waste product by any means, and it can certainly be spun on. It's just not quite as fine as the long fibre, but it is the origin of the toe rag. It's sort of, you know, a harsher fibre. So this, the next process, which doesn't seem to be very commonly used, is bunching. So the bunching is a system of basically just hitting the hemp. All plant fibres, the more you hit them, the crueler you are to them, the better they get. So this picture is from Hogarth's Harlot's Progress. You may know the Rake's Progress, but this is the Harlot's Progress. The poor harlot, she comes up to town, up to London, thinking she's going to become a milliner, but of course she gets forced into prostitution. One of the few professions available for young women in those days. And she's got caught, and here she is in the bridal prison, the ladies' prison. And this is one of the punishments, is to stand and bunch the hemp all day. So you can see there's the logs they've got there, and they've all got a mallet, and they're just going to stand there all day hitting the hemp over and over again, because the more you hit it, the better it gets. So as well as doing it by hand like this, here in East Anglia, they would use windmills. We had a lot of windmills here because it's very flat and windy, no rushing rivers or anything like that. So we used wind for power. And windmills were modified. Obviously, they're usually making wheat flour, but they were modified, A, to break the hemp, and then also to do the bunching. And there were also horse-driven bunching mills where a horse would go round, and big hammers just come up and down and bunch the hemp. And then probably a boy would be moving the hemp underneath, probably a boy with less than 10 fingers, I should imagine. So here we are, finally, after all that, growing it, harvesting it, retting it, breaking it, scutching it, heckling and bunching it, we're ready to spinning. So spinning, as you probably know, is incredibly long-winded process. It doesn't matter how good you are at it, whether you've got a big wheel like the lady in the first picture, or you're using a drop spindle like the sort of medieval women in the next picture, it just takes a long time. I suspect you're all spinners, so you know that. So again, this is another way that the local population were all involved. So women would spin on their wheels at home, men also spun on their wheels at home, and women spun on drop spindles pretty much all the time. And there I've seen some lovely records of people coming through East Anglia, and one of the things they mention is seeing women spinning on drop spindles all the time. So they might be out on the commons herding geese, or I don't know, whatever else they're doing, but they've got the drop spindle in their pinafore all the time. And you know, this is providing quite considerable extra income for rural families, so it's very important. One thing that kind of tickled me a little bit is because I live in a Baptist chapel, a former Baptist chapel. And the weavers in the sort of late 1700s, early 1800s, they were a little bit better off than some of the other rural workers, and they were quite rebellious. They were known for being rebellious, and they left the church and came into the new chapels. So the Baptist chapels were a hotbed of a nonconformism, and the weavers all came here. So I like to think maybe there's a bit of weavy, hempy energy left in my chapel. So here we are. This picture is of a fellow. Here he is. He's in his little cottage weaving away. It's, you know, this hard, unsociable, long hours sitting on your own. The cottage doesn't look very well appointed, but there he is weaving away. The weavers were a little bit better off than some other local rural people. So it was a little bit more prestigious thing to do. Some of them had more than one loom. Some of them took on apprentices, and all this information is coming from probate. So records from docks, things coming in and out of docks, and probate, wills that were read in court. These are the places where we've got really accurate information about, right from the 1500s, actually. Obviously, this guy's a bit after that. He's from the 1800s, but still. Yeah, it's the court records, people leaving their looms, leaving their heddles. To my daughter, I leave this, that you can see exactly what people were doing. And maybe the weavers would have 2 looms and some cows. So, you know, they were a little bit better off. That's because it's more skillful. So before I came here, I really, if you'd had asked me, I would have said that, yeah, hemp was for rope and sacks. But in this other picture here, it's not very clear, but I hope you can see what it is. I live in Suffolk, which is from South Folk, and the county right above us is Norfolk, the North Folk. And so these 2 pictures are maps of Norfolk and Suffolk. They would join together, but unfortunately I wasn't clever enough to make that happen. And you can see that in between the 2 counties, the River Waveney runs. And you can see that there are a huge amount of, there's dots, of course, I'm sorry, I should have said the dots are the numbers of weavers. And all along that Waveney Valley between the 2 counties, there's just endless weaving. This is all records taken from probate. Really, really important, and a huge source of income. So what were they weaving? They were weaving huckabuck. They were weaving canvas, which, you know, as canvas, we think of it as for sales or for painting on, but canvas is just a thick cloth that would be maybe used for workmen's smocks and things like that. They also made twills and dornix, which is a heavy cloth, was used for a sort of insulation. They would have it hanging just a little way away from the wall. That was, if you read Shakespeare, often you've got some saucy person will be behind the dornix, having a little listen. So it's a sort of used as insulation to stop the drafts coming from the drafty old houses. So there was a commission, a parliamentary commission came to Diss, which is my local town, to have a look and see what weavers were up to. And in this record, one individual in the 1830s, who's one of the last Diss hand weavers, he was interviewed, and he said he worked at his loom for 13 to 14 hours a day and wove 2 chains a week. So 2 chains is approximately equal to 40 meters. Anybody who is weaving is a weaver on this talk. I'm sure lots of you experienced weavers. 40 meters a week. That is going some, isn't it? And for this, he would earn the princely sum of 18 shillings per chain, 8 shillings per chain. So, you know, that is really good money, earning well above most of his compatriots. So yeah, what's on this map with the dots, the big dot in the bottom of the Suffolk part, I don't know if you can see my mouse for here, that is our big town, Ipswich. So obviously it's got quite a lot of weavers in it, but these little villages here along the top of the valley, they are tiny, tiny little collections of houses, and yet so many people working in that industry there. yeah, and so the cloth was sold at all the markets. Traders, the Chapman traders came down from all over the country. As I said, it was a really lovely story, or a record, I should say, not a story, of this guy coming down from Manchester. He had 2 horses, so he was pretty well off, and he would go to Norwich. Norwich is the main town in Norfolk. During the medieval period, it was the 2nd biggest town in England, second only to London, and all of its wealth was born from weaving. So originally it was weaving with wool, and then there was a great influx of people from Holland, Huguenots, and weavers and skilled craftspeople from France. They came to Norwich and they boosted it, the trade even more. So when you go to Norwich now, it's everywhere. You can see there is the vestige of the industry in the medieval village, medieval buildings. It's a fascinating place. If you're ever over to come to Norwich, it's great. So this one guy came from the Chapman, who came down from Manchester. He, in his will, which is where we got the information from, he had, you could see who he owed money to, who owed him money, who he bought things from in East Anglia, where it was going. Really interesting. And he'd also left a little, bequeathed a little bit of money for a servant girl in one of the inns in Norwich where he used to stay. Don't know what that's all about, but I kind of like to think that maybe there was a little thing going on, because, you know, people in the olden days, just like people today. He's a traveling salesman. So there we are. We're talking now at the end of the 1700s. It's an economically really important and thriving industry in this area. It's providing employment and income for almost all rural families. And then all of a sudden, the trade just disappears. So why? What happens? Oh, just before I do that, I just want to show you, this is a picture of the Queen Mary. Queen Mary? That's not the right name. What's she called? Oh, I can't remember the name of the ship. Anyway, this is Mary Rose. Sorry, the Mary Rose. This is Henry VIII's favourite ship, apparently. Obviously, it's a slightly more modern painting, but there we are. So this ship is made from oak and hemp. In order for a ship like this, which is a 60-ton warship, to get underway, it would leave at least 10 tons of hemp to get out of the harbour. The sails are made of hemp. All the ropes and riggings are made of hemp. The decks of the ship are caulked with hemp. The sailors' outfits were made of hemp because it is very resistant to rotting in water, salt water. So although the ship is made of oak, it is essentially also very much made of hemp. So, of course, this is, what would I say, strategically important. Without hemp, we haven't got an armada. I mean, we can't beat the armada. We're not going out all over the world conquering other people in a horrible way. So the hemp has been actually really important in terms of material culture. So Henry VIII, he put out an enactment to force landowners to grow hemp for this very reason, to support the navy. That anyone who had over a quarter of acre of hemp for every 6 acres, for every 60 acres apt for tillage, a quarter of a hemp had to be put over, and a fine of 3 shillings and 4pence was found if not obeying the law. So by 1563, I'm sorry, I've jumped around the centuries a little bit here, the area of land sown had increased from 1 acre to every 20 acres. So that's a much higher proportion of land. And the fine for non-compliance had increased to £5, which is a huge sum. You can see that people didn't really want to do that. There was a chap called Robert Kirk. He had a patent to collect these fines. And in 1593, he raised £1,115, 6 shillings and 4pence. It's a huge sum of money. People really didn't want to grow the hemp. Perhaps they didn't want to support the king. I don't know. They wanted to grow something else. But anyway, he was supposed to spend all this money building a new pier at Sheringham, which is a fishing village on the Norfolk coast. What the farmers thought about giving money to make a pier for the fishermen, we don't know. All these various acts of parliament, it wasn't just Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth brought them in, and they were always more than one. Obviously, first of all, it's a strategic material for the military, so it's really important for that. The second thing they always put in these acts, they would provide employment for the idle poor. I suspect the poor weren't being that idle, and if they were idle, they're probably pretty happy being idle. But no, they were forced to do more work, obviously. The sort of the beginning of capitalism, really. Make people do more work so we can make more stuff and sell it and conquer people. And, you know, I'd prefer to hang around being idle. But anyway, they also wanted to decrease the amount of imported yarn because, again, this sort of protectionism. If we can make everything ourselves, then we won't have to trade with foreigners like the French. And it's very easy to understand why, apart from the fact that it was a strategic thing for the Navy. I'm looking here at some import figures from the London docks in 1565, for instance. Hemp and flax products were the most valuable import, and they were worth double that of the second most valuable import, which was wine. So that's a huge amount of money going out of the country to pay somebody else to bring all that stuff in. So the hemp and flax that was coming in 1565 into London, that's only London, remember, there were other big ports at the time. London, Norwich is not right on the coast, but anyway. So the hemp and flax coming into that port was worth £161,454 in 1 year. That's a huge amount of money. And the next highest import was wine at £48,634. So yes, a really huge amount of money going out. So you can see why there were this sort of protectionist attitude was coming in. So these beautiful hemp sails here eventually, as soon as they could make cotton strong enough, they got rid of the hemp sails because it's tremendously heavy and actually very unwieldy. So yes, in terms of material culture, I think it's fair to say that hemp has had a major, major role to play. Both the Vikings and the Saxons who, came across and conquered us. Vikings obviously came down from Sweden and Norway. And then the Saxons, who were German pagans, came across. Who knows, maybe the French, when they came over in 1066, perhaps they had hemp sails. But anyway, it's been a constant strategically important material. So anyway, let's get back to what happened to the thriving industry here in East Anglia. And of course, it was the Industrial Revolution. So although in East Anglia, it was a really, really important, as I've said, it was providing income for so many families, it always remained a cottage industry. That is, the work was done either in people's homes or on the commons. So the spinning was done at home or whilst moving about. The breaking and all so on either happened on a farm or at home or on the common. The whiting and the whiting of the yarn and the whiting of I didn't mention whiting, did I? Sorry about that. That's another part of the system. That all happened out on the common land. So it didn't get to a point where it was in factories and in big workshops. So when the Industrial Revolution started happening up in the north, these huge factories sprung up very, very quickly. It didn't all happen exactly at once, but the number of mills in Manchester increased from 2 in 1790 to 66 in 1821. That's just 30 years. And of course, the invention of the spinning jenny, which was in 1795, I think. Originally, it could spin one thread, and within no time at all, it had been developed to spin 80 threads at once. So of course, that totally knocked out those hand spinning ladies, guarding the geese. And then in 1812, Robert's power loom came into play, and then these huge factories just took off. Of course, this coincided with colonization, the British going to India, stealing all their cotton, and also going to America and demanding cotton from there as well. You may know that in India, the colonial power, the UK colonial power, banned the Indians from spinning their own cotton, which is why one of Gandhi's, his image of him is often on his little chakra wheel which was about, you know, taking back the power and taking back the responsibility and self-sufficiency, because all the cotton had been taken over to Manchester to these horrendous mills where it was being spun on the spinning jenny and then put through the power loom. And then, of course, they shipped the fabric back to India and sold it back to them. Absolutely horrific. So here in East Anglia, there was no rushing rivers to power the original mills that they had in the north. And of course, we've got no coal. So the Industrial Revolution started up there with the rivers, and then these factories were built near the coal mines, and it was all steam power from there on in, and it just totally killed our industry here. So, you know, well, that is the power loom, Robert's power loom. So this beautiful region where I am, which was once a hotbed actually of innovation in agriculture and rural industry, was left completely behind. All the cloth production then started happening up in the north of England, and our little cottage industry, our big cottage industry, was just totally outgunned. I mean, this also coincided with the Napoleonic Wars, which was 1803 to 1815. The Napoleonic Wars pushed the price of wheat right up. So anyone who could grow wheat, as they could here, they ploughed up pasture, and instead of putting in hemp into some of the fields, they put in loads of wheat. So this had an absolute double whammy of horror for rural families here. So the hemp industry was kaput. All that extra income was gone. The dairying industry was kaput because they ploughed up all the pasture and put in wheat. So there was, you know, people plunged into abject misery. There was no work, nothing to do. So this is when the Poor Law came in. Poor Law was 1825, something like that. Sorry, I haven't got the exact date. And the workhouse, this is when these were first developed. And if you can see in this picture here, the Poor Law, if you can look at the picture, these poor people hanging up at the back there. And these actually in the back, at the front here, you can see people bunching hemp with the hammers. These little people here, I don't know if they're children or just small people, they're actually picking hemp and picking oakum, which was picking the bits of hemp fibre out of the tarred rope that had been in the ships. I mean, this is just awful. Look, people stuck up against the wall there, people desperately trying to get in. And actually this, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, at the bottom where they're bunching the hemp, it says, beating this here hemp is worse than breaking stones. Lord have mercy on us poor. So the Poor Law basically was brought in to keep these people from actually starving to death on the streets or in the fields, only just stop them from starving. The way the Poor Law worked was that people who did have money, like farmers, had to pay into the parish, and then the parish looked after the poor. So the farmers who were once upon a time paying these people to do work now had to pay it just to stop them starving. So it wasn't actually a great result for anybody. So there was a general decline in agriculture, the loss of the linen industry due to the Industrial Revolution, and this changing in the type of crops people were growing. 1834, the Poor Law, sorry, reduced these people to absolute, you know, they're at death's door. The parishes didn't really enjoy keeping these half-starving people alive, and the farmers didn't, or the landowners didn't really want to pay into it. So I don't know if this is where your family come in, Sharon, but it was decided that it would be a better option for the parishes, instead of paying people to starve at home, they started paying them to emigrate. So the parishes sought to give these poor people a new start, i.e. get rid of them, by paying passage to Australia and America. So between June 1835 and July 1837, in addition to private emigration, 3,354 people emigrated from Norfolk and 1,083 from Suffolk. It's a lot of people in 1 year, all getting on ships or being sent off on ships, really. So of the total amount of migrants and emigrants involved in early Poor Law schemes, 2/3 originated from Norfolk and Suffolk. And this was very much as a result of the loss of the linen industry. So I just want to talk a little bit about what we do know about the last bits of the industry. So this village sign, I hope you can see it there. I don't know why it's on one side of the screen, not the other. This is a village called North Lopham, which is just over the border into Norfolk from where I am. And you can see this is the village sign. There's a man at his loom. There's a stand of flax here, a spinning wheel, and also a stand of hemp at the top there. So in North Lopham, they made fine damask tableware from hemp. And in fact, it was the very last business to close. And it didn't close until 1925. So actually, it's only 100 years ago. It seems very recent. And they made damask tableware from hemp, which was of such fine quality that it was sent to the royal family. Queen Victoria would use it, and also Henry VII. Anyway, we went up there recently to meet the church warden, a wonderful woman called Jenny Vere. And she has a collection of these Lopham linens that she keeps in the church, and they are absolutely exquisite. Now, I know that when I say, oh, we're making hemp for textile, people go, it's going to be sacking, you know, I'm not going to wear that. I mean, this is tableware, so it's not really for clothing, but if you could see the quality of this fabric, it is like silk. It is absolutely beautiful, absolutely stunning. All hand spun and hand loomed. There was no machine work at all in North Lopham. So it's absolutely extraordinary to see these fabrics. They're just gorgeous. They're gorgeous. And, you know, when we were looking at them, Kitty and I, we had this feeling, it's like, how can it be that in 1925 and for the 200 years before that, they could hand spin and hand loom fabric of this quality from hemp that was grown in this village? Why can we not do it now? What is it? Where, why? We've got more technology, and we seem to have got everything, and yet we can't reproduce this beautiful, beautiful fabric for ourselves. It's infuriating. So that's the North Lopham sign. Oh, here we are meeting Jenny. Can you see the shine on the damask there? Absolutely beautiful. There were altar cloths. This one is from a London club called the Travellers Club. Here's Jenny telling us about it. This is an altar cloth.
IHS, which was in his service. Similar border to the Travellers Club. So they would use elements of the same design.
I don't know if you guys can see that.
They have the languishing in a corner of the cupboard.
Terrible. So this is, although bizarrely, to my mind, the hemp industry in East Anglia has been pretty much forgotten. Even people who have always lived here, they go, really? Oh, I didn't know that. But the language of this industry is totally embedded in our landscape here. You can see Hempnall, there's a village not far from here, another one called Hempstead. This pub at the bottom, the red brick pub, is in Stradbrook, which is my next village. It was called the Hempshire Farms. And when I say to people like the older guys around here, I said, what about do you remember the pub in Stradbrook, Hempshire? They go, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, it was the Hempshire Farms. It's a house now, unfortunately, but we've got also Rettery Cottages at Hoxton, a Spinner's Bridge at Hoxton. We've got Heckfield Green. So, you know, green is like a common, a Heckfield Green, that's where the heckling would go on. I have read that these, you know, it was a social time of year when people were doing the breaking and scutching and heckling. Everyone would be outside on the common, doing this work collectively. Really nice way to be. We've got a bleach green, where the bleaching of the yarn and the cloth went on. There's a hemp in the village I live in, Fressingfield. There's a Hemplands farm. If you look at old tithe maps, you'll see Hempland quite often. So the tithes obviously were sort of tax that had to go to the church. So in farm maps, they had a tithe map which showed you how much you were going to have to pay the church from your crops. And you'll often see hemp land or hemp field, whereas you don't see turnip field or wheat land, because those crops were being rotated all the time. Whereas the hemp, because it sort of improves the soil on its own, it didn't need to be rotated, and then they would keep the hemp in the same piece of land. We've got Hemplands Farm here. I did knock on the door and said, do you know why this farm's called Hemplands Farm? And he said, yeah, because see White House Farm, which is the next one. Well, this used to be called White House Farm, and there were two White House farms next to each other. So we looked at the old tithe map and we saw Hemplands Farm, and we went with that. But I've seen other farms around here called Hempfield, Hemp Farm. There's also a hempen house just behind my place here. There's a hemp barn at Laxfield, and a pal of mine lives out by the coast. She also lives in a hemp barn. So the language is absolutely, you know, embedded. We've got Hempton as well in Norfolk, in Hoxton. I hope you can see that bit of map. I don't know if you can. Yeah, there's the Heckfield Green, Spinners Bridge. It's all there. This pub is called the Scutcher's Arms. That one is still here, actually. That one's over the other side of the county. Oh, there's a better image of the North Lopham sign. Yeah, Hempland Farm and Hempton House, they're both in my village. So here we are. This is I could tell you a little bit about Contemporary Hempery. So we started, this Kitty is my partner in this. She's a peer of my children. They were up at Christmas 21 and we had this chat, and I was telling her I'd just been reading a book about pre-mechanized farming in this area. And that's where I'd learned that hemp was a really big product, because I didn't know anything about it before then. And she's a weaver, and she said, well, I wanted to weave with hemp. And I said, we should grow some. And literally that tiny 3-line conversation, the project just took off from there. In the UK, you have to have a license from the government, from the Home Office. We were told, well, you'll never get the license, but actually we got it quite easily. It wasn't too difficult. And we, having had that conversation Christmas 21, we actually had the seed in the ground. We had to find some land. Of course, we didn't have any land, but lucky we live near this incredible farm called Wakelyns Farm. And when we approached the owner, he just went, yeah, that's no problem. So we had the seeds in the ground, in May, which was quite extraordinary. And the 3 aims of the project really are to revive the growing for hemp for textile in East Anglia. We want to create some really beautiful, luxurious, colourful, patterned hemp fabric, fully produced in the UK. I think, it's lovely. There's nothing wrong with some plain hemp fabric, but we want to really showcase what this incredible fibre can be by making something that's not beige, black, khaki, and just a plain weave. And we really want to engage our community in this endeavour because it's so much fun. So much fun working with people. And yeah, so that's what we're all about. I think, no, there should be a little bit of film here, but I don't think it's going to let me show it. Sorry about that. No, that is, oh no, here it comes. This is a little film that was made over the first, this is Wakelyns. It's an agroforestry site. And there we go. That's it.
That's fantastic, Claire. Thank you so much. Yeah,
Pleasure.
super exciting. And also just to kind of be reminded of some of the things from your presentation on the history that I had taken notes of and was really intrigued by. And yeah, the notion of the bunching was something kind of fascinating that and it's interesting because in the nettle processing research that I've done looking at how fishnets have been traditionally made up and down the Pacific coast here, the hammering of it was something we were working on and exploring and that kind of notion. So anyway, it looked so similar of just seeing it on the end of a log being
Yeah.
hit with a wooden mallet. And it's like, yeah, that's, and one of the things that I love is how this, as we are learning and relearning what's been kind of the sleeping knowledge, if you will, what we learn about flax, we can apply to hemp. What we're learning about hemp, we can apply to nettle, like how what you discover in processing of one and growing of one fast fiber can shift over to another. And it's not that it all necessarily applies, but it gives us a starting point, which is exciting. And I'm really thinking about how your comment about going to North Lapham, am I saying
Welcome.
that?
Welcome.
Lopum, that knowledge of those tablecloths, the damask tablecloths that were possible with all hand done work up until 1925. And so here we are 99 years later, and the notion of focusing on technology, and meanwhile, what's being lost is the hand skill and the human capacity. And, you know, I think as we're in this world now where AI is kind of daily bombardment of what's happening with AI, that reminder of not being overly focused on what's possible with technology as we think about how do we hold on to and retain what's in our fingertips, you know, as we're building this back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. And I like that you brought in the notion of talking about where, you know, that British colonizer agenda is so entangled in textiles and the Industrial Revolution, because it's something for me, I probably spend more time than the average bear thinking about in like where my clothing comes from and who the makers are and what those processes of control and
Yeah, I mean, we're still at it, aren't we?
oh,
It's
yes, yeah, and like
getting-
fast fashion isn't new, right? Let's acknowledge that this goes back for centuries now, and that we're just in the current iteration of it. And I
yeah,
think with all of this, it becomes really overwhelming. Those of us that are, you know, here, especially Vancouver, you know, living on stolen territory, and being in relationship with place and looking at the decolonizing work that needs to happen, it's so huge, it's so easily overwhelming of like, where do we start? And the same with clothing ourselves and building back local industries. It's so overwhelming. Where do we start? And the reality is there's no one answer, and we all start somewhere and we take one step at a time, and it's slow work, but they're connected. And that's the thing that to me is so important. We acknowledge of how we're doing this work in ways moving.
in order to get away from that
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
hideous industrialization and also the slavery aspect, because those people who worked in those mills in the north of England were really working in slavery.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
As our people
free
in,
slaves, but you know, it's still a
yeah,
shocking way to live, as it is for people who work in garment, not all garment factories, but some garment factories around the world now.
yeah,
It just shifts
yeah,
from one part of the world to the other, but the reality of people's lives has not altered.
yeah. So on that notion, in this series, I'm going to be having a conversation with Alan Brown in a few weeks' time, and we are going to be talking about kind of like where this has been historical focused. We are going to be on kind of like future visioning focus. a bit speculative, a bit dreamy and far-fetched perhaps, but as both individuals that have gone from soil to skin on a few different projects, that notion of all the steps of labor in all the different ways, of going from seed in the hand to garment on the back. If you had a step that you would mechanize, if we're thinking about where we can have planned or curated inefficiencies, noting that sometimes that handwork is really pleasurable, things that we love doing, things that create opportunity to be in conversation and to be building community. And then there's the places that are just the sheer drudgery, that are like the hard work, the physical, backbreaking labor. Those are the points that we can be thinking about. How do we mechanize those places and keep the places that are perhaps not as efficient, but have so many benefits in other ways? So what are the places that you think it's important to have that mechanical, technical support?
Really interesting, actually, because we just gained some funding from our local council, their rural business fund. And we were going to go ahead and buy a machine. Do you remember, Rosie, the machinery that she's been developing? So before I went on holiday, I was like, okay, I did all that. When I came back, when I got back to the farm, Pete and Kitty, between them, I mean, he's a fit young man, and that is key. We need fit people. Of course, people started working on the farm when they were 12 years ago. And by the time they were 20, they were strong. They had done, Kitty and Pete had done so much work just with those old breakers that we built, in the first year. And we started thinking, do we want to buy this machinery? We build some more breakers and bring some more people onto the farm, because working with people on the farm is actually one of the main joys of this. I'm not sure the machine is going to be that much more efficient if you've got some people with some muscle who want to do it, and it's fun. The breaking's the hard bit. It's not back-breaking work. It's just work, physical work. Scutching is fine. Heckling is fun. Who doesn't like heckling? I mean, we all love, Kitty and I love heckling. I heckle all day long. Thanks very much. Because I'm not a spinner, and I don't know how to do that. And in order to make the fabric that we want to have really evenly spun yarn. I mean, I know that you and Alan can spin away. So for me, it would be the spinning. I would do mill spinning and then take the weaving back. But that's because that's not my skill.
Right. Excellent.
But I don't think it is backbreaking work. I think that's, I don't think that's the case. If you settled yourself into the thought that you're going to be doing this for the next 10 days, you just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, well, and I was fortunate to be the recipient. Claire and Kitty gave me a bag of tow that had been sitting, I think it was from your first year, right? If I remember correctly. And so this is what came home in my suitcase this was classed as tow. Then I spent, I counted, it was 20 hours over a weekend to get that tow organized, and just to sort of show, because often those of us with bast fibers, and we're thinking of tow and we're thinking of the really short, but I still have some beautiful, 12-inch to 8-inch fibers here. And was able to do some pretty decent. So that one is a 2-ply, and these others are single. And my lighting in here is horrible to show the colors.
What do you think you might weave with those, though?
Well, so I think these ones so this is what I was spinning when I was with you at the farm, and what I finished off after while away. So I think that's going to be for a pair of shoes that I'm working on, on the ancestral project that I'm doing. But this is going to be for a pair of jeans. I've been really fascinated at making a pair of pants for myself, and dyeing them with indigo. So I think they're going to be hemp and nettle, and I'm kind of, but long term, don't expect to see me in these anytime soon. 2030, it's good to have goals.
Have you seen Nick that works with Rosie, they process some flax for somebody, and he's
Yes.
just cutting
Yes.
and sewing the jeans at the moment.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yeah, exciting to see. And also just like recognizing the different properties of hemp versus flax versus nettle, and wanting to kind of play with that a little bit in terms of how I plan the weaving. But I wanted to just circle back around because this is something in Canada, it's interesting. You know, marijuana was legalized in 2019, and being in the city, I am growing and processing and teaching with stinging nettle and with flax. Hemp is the one that is just not going to happen for us in the city because we're in public parks. People are going to just come in and take it, assuming there's something that they can smoke, whatever. But even beyond that is the notion of our licensing. And that's something, you know, I'd hoped to do a little bit more research before our talk to just like become an expert overnight on the history or the current position of hemp in Canada. And that hasn't happened yet, but we do, as far as I know, still need licensing. I have heard from a friend who checked in with somebody who's growing it stateside with a license, and was curious about being able to get the stalks from what they're growing. And apparently they are like filmed while they are burning or destroying the stalks from that hemp. Cannot be used in any way because of the tight restrictions. I've hopefully got that right. But, you know, this is where there's so many secondary and tertiary industries that could happen. And Kathy is going to, so Kathy's going to join us now. Yes, Kathy.
Yes. Well, I'm just looking at, so we have the Cannabis Act, and I gather that it's going to be tweaked because I think that they've realized that industrial hemp is not CBD, THC. And in fact, actually, it's pretty shitty what's going on. All the industrial hemp varieties have to be registered and tested for CBD, THC, and they have to be below a certain whatever percentage in order to qualify. But I'm just looking at normally you'd have to apply for an industrial growers hemp growers license federally and all that. But if you're only using bare mature stalks or fiber from the stalks, you don't need a license. And so that's where I'm thinking, like, we need to partner up with one of these growers in Manitoba. There's a lot going on in Alberta as well. And a lot of what they do is burn.
Yeah.
And it's just like, because like the byproducts, you know, I was trying to remember what it's, the herds, the inner woody stuff that is used for no end of stuff, everything from like bedding for animals and whatever. But you know, if we could get our hands, because you know, when I gave you that pile of stocks, which I can't remember who gave them to me, it was somebody who was testing in the industry for the flour. And they were just discarding those stocks, right?
I mean, I would say that this is a wonderful thing about hemp, that you can get everything from it. You can clothe yourself, build a house, you can make medicine, you can make paper, blah, blah, blah. But realistically, if you want the finest fiber, you're going to cultivate it a little different. If you want maximum bulk because you want to make insulation, or, you know, you're trying to build yourself a house, you know, you're going to cultivate the plant differently. So or if you want oil, you've got a different type of plant, a bushy plant, whereas our plants are long and thin, they don't bush out at all. So, you know, you might go, well, actually, these people are growing that stuff. It's not really suitable for our purposes because it's been... And we're the same here. So under the terms of our license, we cannot take a flower or a leaf from the farm. We have to say what we're going to do in order to destroy those parts of the plant. And I even approached the Home Office and said, well, it hasn't grown very well. I'd like to send some off to a lab, you know, to get analysed. No, can't take the leaf off the farm.
Wow. Wow.
Well, and the problem we have now, and I guess, I mean, if Britain was still in the EU, it would still be a problem, which is that there's actually a list of varieties that are the federal government, you can pick off that list. They might not be the best varieties for growing, you know, hemp for fiber, and you know, and that's a problem.
Well, ours come from France, and they're you know, there's a specific varieties for oil, specific varieties for fiber, and then specific varieties if you want more herb. So not herb.
So
But yeah, they've all got 0.2% THC. And somebody said, oh, how can you allow us to have the license, except that we're going to grow it for textile, know that it's got no THC in it, and also say you can't take the leaf off the farm? I mean, there's no logic in it. But don't look for the logic if you're dealing with the government.
Yeah,
Oh,
although the only
I
glimmer of hope is they're going to change, they're changing something in Canada, but I think I shall just trot down the road to talk to my member of parliament, because I was talking to her yesterday about the craziness going on in the world, and just put that one on her radar. But it also might be that we could do an e-petition to the federal government, because that's something that they have to pay attention to,
Right.
Sharon, is
Yeah.
like gather together the whole fiber
yeah,
community to go after them and just say, look, we're losing an opportunity. It's,
Yeah.
one thing is the craft
Right.
end of it, but the other is the economic opportunities of, small scale industry.
completely. So I just have one more question before I end the video and we step into kind of our informal conversation. I wondered if, Claire, you can just give us kind of a condensed note on the season of like what's your temperature, your air temperature, your soil temperature when you're seeding? How many days generally is it until that first harvest versus the second harvest?
So the first year we put it in the last week of May and the first week of June. We put in twice. By the 9 weeks later, it was all the same height. So it didn't really matter when we put it in.
Okay.
I'm reading a lot actually that maybe we could put it in April. Traditionally, I've got this fantastic book, which I recommend very highly.
Oh,
It's
yes, this was
instructions for the cultivating and raising of flax and hemp in a better manner than that generally practiced in Ireland. And it's really a bit of industrial espionage. He is a guy from England, and he's gone to Holland and England to see how they produce their hemp and flax. It's a
what year did that come out?
1724.
All right.
They're similar
Absolutely.
documents about flax because they were
Yes.
convinced the Irish were slobs.
Well, he
Okay.
also thinks they're slobs, so that's why he's gone off to. But it's a brilliant book, and it just fantastically kind of reinforced everything that we're doing is the right thing. So that was really great. But I'm just going to read you this bit here. He's gone off and he's chatting with people, and he's talking about the degree of fineness. He said, I'm told by persons of credit that in France they make considerable quantities of fine hemp and linen, mostly worn by persons of quality and fashion, they finding it warmer and more lasting than flax and linen.
Quality.
Persons of quality and fashion.
Wow. All right. I am going to end our recording on that note. Thank you, Claire. Don't go anywhere. We're going to keep this conversation going. And those of you still watching this as a video, thank you for that. And recording